pursuant to RCW 3693. The City of Tukwila agreed to reopening of the public hearing and in conjunction waived the 120-day review period established in that statute. Tukwila is seeking a final decision and resolution and report and the attendant closure of the record for file number 2343 by no later than February 18th of 2014. The special meeting public hearing was duly scheduled for today, and for this public hearing tonight, the board has asked for the City of Tukwila, King County, the City of Seattle, and the North Highline Fire District to address the following issues. So we will be having no public testimony and only the testimony on these specified issues from those particular folks. The alignment for the boundaries of Area Q, North Highline Area Y, which was rejected by the citizens in November, and South Park Sliver Community. There's particular interest in plans for compliance with RCW 3693, 180, 14, and 8. This presentation should address the impacts resulting from the failed annexation by Burien. Number 2, the creation of a logical service areas, that is fire protection, emergency medical care, policing, utilities, and storm drainage. There is a particular interest in plans for compliance with 3693-180, number 3. These are our criteria and factors that we must address as part of our decision making. The presentation should address the impacts resulting from the failed annexation by Burien of Y, Area Y. Number 3, the South Park Bridge. Review of the 2003 interlocal agreement between King County, Seattle, and Tukwila, and the more recent updates of that agreement to provide information about changes to the funding plan by an interlocal agreement for the rebuilding, operation, and maintenance of that facility. Please include plans for the future ILA to address the South Park Bridge. These are our directions that we gave to those who we testified. Number 4, provision by the City of Tukwila, King County, the City of Seattle, and the North Highline Fire District of information concerning the objectives by individual agencies and by agencies working together for the future coordinated governance and services to Area Q and the South Park Sliver. This presentation should address the impacts resulting from the failed annexation of North Highline Area Y. So we will be limited, as I said earlier, exclusively to this testimony presented by the City of Tukwila, the City of Seattle, King County, and the North Highline Fire District. Public testimony is closed on this matter. At this time, I would ask board members if there are members who have a conflict of interest, such as a personal interest or a professional involvement, which might affect your ability or the perception of your ability to fairly hear the proposal. This time, will you please indicate for the record? Have you had any ex parte communication with any interested party while this matter has been before us? The court reporter will note that there were no affirmative discussions here. If anyone present has reason to question the ability of any board member to hear and judge fairly under the doctrine of appearance of fairness, please say so now. So I will ask our legal counsel to go through the process for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of you have been here and heard this before, but bear with me, please. The purpose of this hearing is to gather testimony, and in order that everyone can be heard, we're going to follow the following guidelines. If you'd like to speak this evening, we ask that you sign the roster that is on your far right end of the table if you haven't already done so. If you have any exhibits that you would like the board to consider, please submit them to Mr. Holmes or to Ms. Blam, the Executive Secretary. They will be labeled. The board is going to retain any exhibits that are submitted to it throughout its public hearing process and for a minimum of 30 days after it reaches its resolution and hearing decision, 30 days being the appeal period to appeal the board's decision to the Superior Court. We do ask that you direct your comments to the factors and objectives of the Boundary Review Board. Those are reproduced on the agendas here. This particular meeting is a little different. As Chair Evans outlined, we are here primarily to receive evidence on the 4 major subjects that she identified, and we would ask that you limit your testimony to that. At this hearing, the proponent, which is the City of Tukwila, will present testimony first. It's allowed 20 minutes for that presentation. Then representatives of other government agencies will have 15 minutes to speak. We ask that all the speakers respect and follow the time allocations for the testimony. Mr. Holmes is operating a time clock. He will hold up signs that indicate when you have 1 minute remaining to speak. We ask that you watch for those notices and respect them and limit your testimony to the time allotted. We do ask that the audience remain silent during the testimony. Even though we are in this particular facility, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and we should all be conducting ourselves as if we were in a courtroom. Only the board members may ask questions of the witnesses. If the board members have any questions for the witnesses, the time that they take to answer those questions does not count against their time for their presentation. If the board has any legal questions, it directs them to me. I'm the board's Special Assistant Attorney General. After the proponent and the other parties have given all their testimony, the proponent will have the opportunity to return to provide rebuttal. They'll be allotted 10 minutes for that rebuttal. Rebuttal is not the opportunity to represent the case all over again. It is the opportunity to respond specifically to the points that the speakers made after the city made its initial presentation. After the public hearing is closed, the board will deliberate and make a preliminary decision. And just so I want to clear up later, sometimes when the board makes a motion to close the public hearing and conduct deliberations, sometimes folks think, well, if it's closed, we have to leave. Board deliberations are open to the public. We welcome everyone to remain here during those deliberations, even though the public testimony portion of the hearing will be closed. After the board deliberates, it will adopt a motion that will direct staff to prepare a written resolution and hearing decision. That resolution and hearing decision will be based upon the board's decision, which must be based upon the evidence. The evidence consists of the testimony that's given at the public hearings and the exhibits that are submitted prior to the hearing and in the course of the public hearing. The board will consider that resolution and hearing decision at its February regular meeting at a date to be
February 14th.
Thank you. February 14th. All right.
Okay,
well,
what can I say?
All right.
We'll have candy.
This public hearing is being recorded, as you heard at the top. There is a court reporter present who is taking everything down verbatim. Transcripts will be available for purchase. If you're interested in purchasing a transcript, please talk to Mr. Holmes about that, and he can give you information about that. Because we are acting, we meaning the Boundary Review Board, are acting as a quasi-judicial body, the only information that the board can base its decision on is the testimony that comes from that podium under oath during the course of the hearing. So if there's, in the course of a break, I ask that you not approach any of the board members to discuss this matter. If you do, they're going to politely ignore you, because that is what they're supposed to do. They shouldn't be, board members shouldn't be taking any information outside of the public hearing, and we ask that you not provide them the opportunity to do so. Everyone who wishes to sign, I trust, who testify, I trust has signed up. If you have not, I'll ask that you do so shortly. If you do intend to testify this evening, I'll ask that you please stand if you're able and raise your right hand. Do you all swear or affirm that the testimony you'll give this evening will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
So now I'll ask the Executive Secretary to please begin calling those people who wish to testify.
The first to the podium, please, is the Tukwila team. And a reminder that you have in total 20 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure to address the board members and the staff tonight in support of the Tukwila annexation of Area Q.
Excuse me, may I interrupt you? I forgot to please say that you should speak your name and address.
That was coming after I said that. My name is Jim Haggerton, and a little bit of an introduction. I'm the current mayor of the city of Tukwila. That's spelled Haggerton, as on the slide. I'm the current mayor of the city of Tukwila. I've been mayor 5 years. I was on the city council 13 years prior to that, and on the Tukwila Planning Commission 9 years prior to that. So I've been around for quite a while, and all the time when there was discussion of the Tukwila potential annexation area, Q that is before you tonight. I'd like to emphasize some underlying facts in the Tukwila annexation. Several who have testified before you are trying to tie the annexation of Area Q into the ongoing maintenance costs of the South Park Bridge. There should be no connection of the two. In 2003, Ron Sims, then the King County executive, wanted to divest the county of the forward thrust pools in Fort Dent Park. Tukwila accommodated this request by taking over the Foster Pool and Fort Dent Park at a cost of about $800,000 to the city annually. Tukwila also gave King County $3 million for future replacement and or repairs to the South Park Bridge. Tukwila traded its liability for the bridge for an even larger liability in Fort Dent Park and the pool. Given that cooperative history between King County and Tukwila, I am truly surprised by the unfortunate and unwarranted tone that King County now takes before this board regarding the 2003 agreement. Rather than relying on the unfounded innuendo that King County now presents, we ask you instead to rely on the actual words spoken at the time by King County Executive Ron Sims and Council Member Dwight Peltz, and reflected in Exhibit 13 to Tukwila's supplementary brief. You can see it on the screen. I'm going to quote Ron Sims in November of 2002. Ron says, "I want to commend the city, led by Mayor Mullet at that time, for taking leadership on the pool and the bridge. These agreements illustrate what can be accomplished by working together. It is wonderful that the South Central Pool will remain open to the public." And at that same time, King County Council Member Dwight Peltz agreed and stated, "This agreement is a win for both King County and the city of Tukwila. I hope that this creative solution will be a model for future agreements between the county and local governments." Maintenance of the South Park Bridge should not be a consideration in this hearing. In addition to the bridge information above, King County Metro and Sound Transit receive in excess of $34 million annually from sales tax generated in the city of Tukwila for various uses. I hope you can understand my frustration when I attend the BRB hearings and have King County vocally oppose this Tukwila annexation request. The property owners located in Area Q approached the city of Tukwila requesting that we annex that area. They brought us the required petition representing signatures from 10% of the assessed valuation property owners, and our council authorized the city seek the required 60%. We received over 70% of the required signatures and filed all documents with King County on August the 31st, 2012 for the annexation to go forward. Another concern expressed by the BRB was for the future of Fire District 11. We have held several meetings with Fire District 11 in an effort to ensure this concern was adequately addressed. We are committed to continue working with the Fire District to bring about an orderly transfer of services. Once Area Q is annexed to the city of Tukwila, I feel confident that the area will receive equal to, and in most cases, better services from the city of Tukwila than they've ever received before. In the Seattle Times newspaper on December the 10th, that was 1 month ago today, a major article covered the South Park community and how Seattle Public Utilities had ignored the flooding of water and sewage into many of the homes in that South Park neighborhood over the years. Just now, Seattle has developed some kind of a plan to address that issue, but it's a future project. This is exactly the type of issue Tukwila deals with on a regular basis and in a fast and efficient manner, not years. When the city of Tukwila annexed our Allentown neighborhood, we had to install completely new sewer system and underground water pumps to address the future flooding issues. We invested in the infrastructure to assist that neighborhood, and now we have many new homes being built in that area. It's a pleasure to see the residential communities grow as a result of the city investments. Tukwila is a city of prompt action in dealing with residential and business concerns, permitting and construction. Existing businesses throughout Tukwila know and appreciate that fact, and businesses located in Area Q know how we conduct our business, and that's why they want to become a part of the Tukwila community. The executive director of the State Transportation Improvement Board attended our ribbon cutting ceremony on December the 14th, 2012, where we dedicated our new 5-lane road connecting South 180th Street and South 200th Street in our area called Tukwila South. That director of state TIB made the following comments. The Transportation Improvement Board continues to award Tukwila transportation funds because they move projects forward to completion in a timely manner and we see results for our dollars invested. That I consider the ultimate compliment for how the city of Tukwila approaches its business dealings. The city's strategic plan, which we just finalized last month, December of 2012, accurately states the vision we are taking forward. Tukwila, the city of opportunity and the community of choice. Tukwila is the community of choice for the businesses in Area Q. Thank you for your consideration and approval of the Tukwila annexation of Area Q. I'm now going to turn over the mic to Mike Kenyon, our city attorney, who will address the specific questions asked by the board. Thank you so much for your attention. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Board, just for the record, I am Mike Kenyon, Kenyon Deasond, 11 Front Street South in Issaquah, Washington. I want to begin simply by passing on my law partner, Shelley Kerslake's regrets for not being here. She represented Tukwila at your earlier hearings and is on an extended medical leave. It is not, it certainly would be her preference to be here, and she doesn't want you to feel insulted by her absence this evening. So she's asked me to step in for it, and I do want to take...
Could you speak up a bit?
Yes, Shelley's asked me to step in. I would like to address specifically the criteria, the 4 questions that the board asked be addressed. The first one, of course, are the statutory review criteria. The statute begins that the board should attempt to find compliance with those criteria. There are 3 in particular that you've asked about. The first one is the preservation of natural neighborhoods and communities. In Tukwila, we have a heavy industrial neighborhood and community right there. It is similar, nearly identical, to the way that the land uses lay out in Area Q. The preservation of natural neighborhoods and communities flows naturally between Area Q and Tukwila. Exhibits 1 to 3 to Tukwila's supplemental brief show that, I think, quite clearly. In addition, one of the sub-parts of the criteria is to look at the topography and geography of the area. Exhibits 2 and 3 in particular show you that the topography between Tukwila and Area Q is nearly identical, while the topography between Area Y and the sliver is nearly identical and dissimilar from Q and Tukwila. And in addition, just the dictionary definition of geography advises that you can look at features and industries of a region to meet the definition of a geography. That's just from the dictionary.com definition. So that criterion is pretty easily, pretty clearly met by Tukwila in these photos and in the material that we've submitted in our supplemental brief. The second criterion that you've asked us to look at is the prevention of abnormally irregular boundaries. And I want to focus on the word abnormally irregular. That is, by definition, an irregular boundary is appropriate and is one that the board can and often does sustain. What you need to stay away from is an abnormally irregular boundary. The Lear versus the Whatcom County Boundary Review Board case says that in black and white, and I suppose it makes sense when you look at the provisions of the law itself. It is the prevention of an abnormally irregular, not just an irregular boundary. The boundaries of Tukwila's proposed annexation are shown on the lower left there. They are pretty darn regular. Other than pure straight line boundaries, every boundary would be irregular. And this actually does have a fair number of straight line boundaries, follows natural topography, natural streets, and lays out what we think is perfectly normal and certainly not abnormally irregular boundary. If the board's concern with respect to that criterion is King County Policy U205, which is the one that's in your record, it's the policy that indicates that King County will not support an annexation that creates an unincorporated island. The policy simply does not apply here. The annexation that Tukwila proposes of Area Q is an annexation of its entire PAA. Tukwila is not leaving any form of unincorporated island. There will be a remaining unincorporated island of Area Y and the sliver, but Tukwila has no legal ability to take on those areas. Neither of those areas is in Tukwila's PAA. Area Q comprises the full extent of Tukwila's PAA. So it is not only not creating, and that's the operative verb in the policy, not creating an unincorporated island, it is making the remaining unincorporated islands smaller. When this board approved the annexation by Burien of Area Y, had that passed, a unincorporated island would have still remained, consisting of the sliver and Q. There was no objection from King County or Seattle at that point, and this board authorized it. Tukwila's annexation is no different here. The last statutory criterion you asked us to look at is sub 8, annexation of areas which are urban in character. As you can tell from the photo, Exhibit 1 to our supplemental brief, Tukwila's existing area there is heavy industrial. Area Q is heavy industrial. Tukwila's comp plan includes the urban designation for Area Q, and Tukwila's zoning is wholly supportive of both heavy and light industrial uses. Turning to the board's second question, given the failure of what the annexation of Area Y, are logical service areas created? Clearly, the failure of the annexation to Burien of Area Y has changed things for the better in that case. King County serves all of North Highliner now, all of Y, all of Q, all of the sliver. With the failure of the annexation of Area Y to Burien, King County will continue to do that. King County Sheriff will serve Y, will serve the sliver. Water District 20 will continue to serve. Valley View Sewer will continue to serve. In Area Q, Tukwila will take over roads, will take over capital facilities, will take over police. Tukwila's police services are an enhancement. Not that that's required, but it's an enhancement over King County Sheriff Services in Area Q. I'd refer you initially to Assistant Chief Bruce Linton's declaration that was filed with Tukwila's opening brief, where you see the full range of Tukwila services, the full range of Tukwila staffing. It exceeds those that are identified in the King County Sheriff's declaration. Even this very evening, you were provided with a declaration from Assistant Chief Pingree of the King County Sheriff's Office. The staffing levels that he indicates on page 2 of his declaration that apply within the North Highlines area are inferior to those identified in Tukwila Assistant Chief Bruce Linton's declaration filed with Tukwila's opening brief. And finally, Assistant Chief Pingree says on the 3rd page of his declaration that in the event Area Q is annexed to Tukwila, that officers responding to calls would need to travel through Tukwila and Seattle jurisdictions to reach the sliver. Well, sure, that's true. It would be the same roads they use now, though. It would just be Seattle ownership rather than King County ownership. There's no change in how King County sheriffs would serve the sliver in terms of driving on certain roads. There's no reduction in King County Sheriff Services to North Highline by virtue of Tukwila's annexation. Fire services, the only other remaining service in terms of logical service boundaries. Fire District 11, North Highline will continue to exist, will continue to serve Area Y. Here, yes, Area Y and the sliver. The Area Q annexation includes only about 7% of Fire District 11. A very small portion of it, especially compared to the Area Y annexation, where nearly 93% of Fire District 11, North Highline Fire, would have been assumed. In this case, then, responding specifically to the board's question, the failure of the Area Y annexation maintains Fire District 11's existence. Fire District 11 has submitted a declaration indicating there's about $150,000 worth of lost revenue. The city of Tukwila has provided to you Exhibit 14 in the supplemental materials. The draft agreement provided by Tukwila to Fire District 11, it says We will give them a 5-year term, and we're going to waive the assumption of transfer of asset provision. Fire District 11 will suffer no downside. Tukwila Fire Services, again, are enhanced compared to the level provided by Fire District 11. Your proof there is the declaration of Chief Nick Olivas submitted with Tukwila's opening brief. Tukwila and Fire District 11 have been meeting. You saw the slide when Mayor Harrigan was presenting. Have met 7 times or 8 times in the last several months. We continue to meet as recently as this week. Tukwila is committed to working with Fire District 11 to resolve any outstanding issues they do have. To the extent the board has a concern, Tukwila is more than happy to have the board established for this annexation the precise same condition that you established for Burion's annexation of Area Y that requires us to sit down and negotiate an interlocal agreement. Remember, that was a condition imposed when 93% of District 11 would go away. Here it's only 7%. We want to turn to really the elephant in the room right now, and that is the South Park Bridge and the 2003 interlocal agreement. From Tukwila's perspective, the opposition that this board is seeing from King County and from the City of Seattle is not at all grounded in the review criteria that you are required to address. Rather, it is grounded solely, and we say solely intentionally, in the dispute regarding future maintenance and operation costs for the South Park Bridge. As the mayor indicated, let me back up one step. The South Park Bridge, King County's own paperwork, their Tiger II grant application, which is included with Tukwila's opening brief and with its supplemental brief, calls the South Park Bridge not only a regional, but a national asset. It's not local. It's not something that merely the residents of Area Q should fund. Rather, it's truly a regional asset that is used for freight and many other purposes. King County's own words in its Tiger II grant application. In 2002, when Executive Sims came to Mayor Mullet to try to strike a deal, what the proposal was from King County was swapping regional problems. King County couldn't afford to keep open its regional assets of Fort Dent Park and Foster Pool. King County asked the city to take that on, and the city said yes. The city of Tukwila took on a regional problem. And in exchange, King County took on the regional problem of Tukwila's end of the bridge. That alone should be cause this board to say, good enough, Tukwila, let's move forward with this annexation. But Tukwila did even more. Tukwila did even more. And I want to call to your attention a couple of exhibits that are attached as under, they were submitted to the board on October 23rd after one of the original hearings. And that's the 1989 and 2003 agreements. In 1989, Tukwila and King County signed an interlocal agreement that provides a couple of important things. One paragraph of the 1989 agreement says each party agrees to pay 50% of the cost of the operation and maintenance for the South Park Bridge. So from 1989 to 2003, Tukwila paid 50% of the M&O for that bridge. The agreement also says, the 1989 agreement says, that King County will negotiate and enter into an interlocal with Tukwila for future costs. That is the 2003 agreement. That 1989 agreement calls that out. The 2003 agreement says in a couple of key places, page 1, the county now desires to assume the maintenance and operation of the city's half of the bridge. Page 2, purpose of the agreement is to define the county and city rules and establish the entirety of the city's financial obligation towards the bridge's annual M&O. Page 3, county agrees to assume sole responsibility for operating, maintaining, repairing, and replacing the bridge. City will have no obligation to provide any further financial obligation. This is the county's agreement, signed by Ron Sims, agreed to by the county, and the county can't walk away from its deal now. buzzer for my time, I take it that's the same. I would ask Madam Chair for 30 more seconds.
No, sir, I'm sorry, we take it our time very seriously. Does the board have any questions for Mr. King? Yes, Mr. King?
I have one question. The picture that over this side up here of the industrial area of Area Q and the industrial area in Tukwila, can you tell me exactly where that area in Tukwila is located? If you just say it's in Tukwila, but I'd like to know where.
It's actually the upper left corner, that's the area Q,
Right.
where the marina is. And then the bottom picture is along East Marginal Way where the Boeing facility is. So that's the Boeing plant too, and then across the street is the Boeing field.
So how far away from?
They're across the
area Q?
river.
Across the river? Okay, thank you.
Just for the record, for the report of the speaker was Minnie Dollywall, Associate Planner for the City of Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Cook?
Yes, thank you. I'll try to speak up. Could you describe the whereabouts and the progress in the negotiations you had with the fire district? Your draft here, as you stated, with the contract through 17, is that correct? 17 is what you're proposing to the district? The contract with North Highland, you're proposing to go through to 17?
Correct.
Okay. And then also not to request and actually not to accept any asset transfer.
To waive that.
Would you describe why that is not in place now?
Because Fire District 11 so far at least has not agreed to those
Can you
terms.
speak up, please?
Fire District 11 so far has not agreed to those terms. One proposal from the Fire District is a 10-year term rather than a 5-year term. There may be another issue or two that David Klein can speak to.
Yeah, those are. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. Ma'am. Go ahead.
The series of meetings with North Highland Fire District, 7 of them you pointed out starting in 2012. At what point was the draft agreement that shows up as Exhibit 14 introduced into those discussions?
David Klein, in charge of
David Klein, City Administrator. Good to see the whole board again from our last meeting. So I've been one of the main negotiators with that. I worked with Fire District 11 in my former job. I was interim city manager with City of Burien when they were looking at these annexation areas, so I know many of these players. This fire chief was the fire chief that I had in Burien, so I know many of these people. Commissioner Ray Austin was the main negotiator from Fire District 11. And it was after the board last meeting, we brought this to the next meeting, I think. If you can go back to the dates there. On December 20th, I believe, is when we exchanged some different alternatives. Actually, the first alternative that was provided to us was a 15-year request from the fire district. And we came with this 5-year proposal, and we were not able to come to some terms before that. But the fire, we decided not to, in that agreement, you'll see that we're not taking the asset transfer and are agreeing to pay them to continue to make sure there's a smooth transition for 5 years in that whole area, to make sure, as I committed to here in the board last time, that there will continue to be service in that area. We're all concerned about service in that area.
Ms. Anderson?
To the attorney, I'm sorry I've gotten your name. If the chair had been able to grant you your 30 seconds, what would you have said?
I've always liked you. Very briefly, and you also, Madam Chair. We've just addressed the last question that the board asked for, and that is the future governance. I would say that Tukwila remains committed to working closely with Seattle and King County and the other special purpose districts to negotiate appropriate agreements. We likewise expect those partners, particularly King County, to honor its past agreements with Tukwila.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Anyone else? Yes. Ms. Cassell.
Mr. Kenyon. You mentioned King County Comprehensive Plan Policy U205, and what I struggle with a little bit is between areas Y, Q, and the sliver, you already have an unincorporated urban island. But with this annexation, at least those three areas are contiguous. With this annexation, you would create two unincorporated islands that are not contiguous. Can you address that a little bit in the context of that King County comprehensive policy?
Yes, the most direct answer I can give you is that right now, Area Y is in Seattle's PAA and not Tucker's. And the sliver will very soon officially be in Seattle's PAA, just waiting for ratification of the CPPs. So at that point, Seattle is the only entity that has the legal ability under the Growth Management Act and the new CPPs to annex that area, the area being the combination of Y and the sliver. Tukwila has no legal ability to annex the sliver or the Y at this point. Q is the full extent of Tukwila's PAA.
Any other questions from board members? Yes, Mr. Cook.
Just one thing that's always kind of troubled me, and I understand because you're selling your case, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it's you're presenting this, and that's what I'm inferring. But all the presentations kind of infer that everything west of Q that's not in the city is really doesn't have everything. The only industrial thing you have in common is a bowling field, and the fact that that's not accurate. And I mean, the area to the west is very heavily industrialized, north of 96. It's very similar to Area Q. And I guess I'd just like to hear why the connection of Tukwila has always made that dissimilar area. It's only associated with Boeing Field and areas to the south. I understand it's not in your PA and you don't really want that area right now, but how can I'm trying to say in one of your argument about the boundaries and natural neighborhoods and things like that. The fact is, the zoning requires that neighborhoods require a lot of different things, including industrial, commercial. But again, why the disconnect with the area, I guess, to the west of it? I've had trouble getting my hands around that.
No, it's an awkward situation, I agree with you, board member. Okay. The answer gets back to what Tukwila did in 1995 in adopting the PAA, that is Area Q and nothing more. That PAA designation was not objected to, and it certainly was not appealed. And so that is what Tukwila has as its PAA. And if you know, would the council be interested in taking the rest of it and have that opportunity? I don't know, but maybe so. Just the city has no legal.
It's a card you hold.
Yeah, that's no legal authority to do it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. The City of Tukwila.
Next to the podium is King County, please.
Good evening. For the record, Jennifer Stacy with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. And with me here tonight are several representatives from King County. From the King County Executive's Office, we have Fred Jarrett, Deputy County Executive, as well as Karen Freeman, Senior Policy Analyst with the Executive's Office. Mr. Jarrett will have some remarks at the conclusion of my presentation. In addition, since we last convened, the county has a new sheriff, and with us tonight from the Sheriff's Office is Major James Graydon. The Major is very familiar with the North Highline area and the issues presented here this evening, and is available for any questions you may have. In addition, as has been discussed a little bit already, the Sheriff's Office has provided a short supplemental declaration, which I'll discuss in a little bit. As outlined in the county's brief, the county has serious concerns with respect to Tukwila's proposal, and those are largely unchanged in light of the failed annexation of Area Y. In short, Tukwila's proposal was before and is now substantially inconsistent with the objectives of this board and the policies contained in the King County Comprehensive Plan, and it should be denied. As the county's concerns are largely unchanged, and those concerns are well documented in the record, and given the limited time, I'd like to focus my comments this evening on just some of the additional concerns that are presented by Tuckahoola's proposal in light of that failed annexation of Area Y. If there are questions in other areas that I don't have time to address, I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions that you may have. One of the first issue I'd like to discuss is some of the boundary issues, which is one of the questions that the board specifically had for the parties. And as there's already been some discussion on this issue, it is the county's position that an additional issue now posed by this proposal is that 2 urban unincorporated islands will be created if Tukwila annexes Area Q, and that would be Area Y, and the sliver now become urban unincorporated islands. Understandably, serving and ultimately annexing these kinds of islands is a major challenge. And for that reason, there are those policies that have been discussed already in the King County Comprehensive Plan to prevent this type of scenario. And it's the county's position that Tukwala's proposal is contrary to that King County Policy U-205. And we disagree with Tukwala's reading of that policy. We think the plain meaning, we have a different, we believe the plain meaning is different than Tukwila would suggest. But at a minimum, even if we were to take some of Tukwila's suggestions in terms of how to look at this policy, at a minimum, there still should be, as the policy talks about, an interlocal agreement that precedes the annexation. In this instance, an ILA that would involve Tukwila, the county, and the city of Seattle, if that's what would be required. But we think at a minimum there needs to be an ILA in advance that would address this, so that we don't have these urban unincorporated islands that just kind of are left remaining difficult to ultimately annex. So not only is there that issue with the King County Comprehensive Plan, but we think creating these type of urban islands is contrary to the board's objectives of preventing irregular boundaries. With regard to irregular boundaries, another issue the county's already discussed in its briefing at the previous hearing, the abnormally irregular boundary that the county sees being formed in terms of there only being a 300-foot wide, very narrow corridor that connects the southern tip of the triangle to the city of Tukwila. And by annexing the triangle, it becomes this kind of finger-like extension northward for the city of Tukwila. And again, looking at the map, now that Area Y is not been annexed to Burien, if the city of Seattle were to ultimately annex the remaining areas, again, this is uncertain, especially given the financial issues that would be involved, but now that Burien has pulled it from its PAA, Area Y that is, Seattle's really the only kind of jurisdiction left in play. And if Seattle were to annex the remaining areas, if Tukwila annexed Area Q, that area becomes almost entirely surrounded by the city of Seattle, and again, creating abnormally irregular boundaries. And it's these type of piecemeal annexations that, not only the irregular boundaries, but it splits up neighborhoods, and it also results in real confusion for emergency responders. And we heard sometimes with significant consequences, as was discussed in some of the public testimony of the previous hearing. And on that note, the other issue I'd like to address tonight is some of the service area issues and how they're impacted by the failed annexation of Area Y. In light of the failed annexation, should Tukwila's proposal be approved, the sliver is left as an island, and emergency responders would have to travel through Tukwila and Seattle just to reach it. This creates the type of confusion that I've already mentioned. And as stated in the declaration of Chief Pingree, which we've provided tonight, that isolation could result in increased response times for serious emergency calls, as well as reduced service levels overall. And as stated in that declaration, this type of situation is not only fiscally irresponsible, it presents real life and safety implications. With regard to the magnitude of the problem, in terms of responding to this area and what's involved, Tukwila's represented that the call volume to the triangle is quite low, and the numbers they gave, 24 calls a year. Those numbers are based on a very limited time shot, as is stated in the declaration they provided. The one-page exhibit we handed out this evening was produced by the Sheriff's Office in response to a public disclosure request by the City of Tukwila, and taking a 5-year kind of a broader view and looking at the numbers a little more in depth, shows that the average number of calls annually to the triangle is closer to 75. So that's kind of the magnitude that we're talking about. By approving Tukwila's proposal, it would essentially set these illogical service areas in stone. This would create long-term life and safety issues. And there's really quite simply no justification for this disservice, especially in light of the fact that the county can continue to provide a high level of service until a comprehensive solution can be reached for all of North Highline. And with regard to the resources that the Sheriff's Office can bring to bear, those are outlined in the various declarations. Major Graydon can speak to those further this evening if there are questions. But the Sheriff does have the ability, in addition to those resources, to seamlessly engage with its partners, as I understand they did even this evening, and really have a robust response to this area. On the fire district issue, I'd just like to touch on it very briefly as we're talking about service area issues. There is no agreement, even if there were. We think, frankly, it doesn't solve a single problem presented by Tukwila's proposal. It may solve some financial issues that the fire district has. It does not solve the issue of irregular boundaries. It does not solve the service area issues that would be presented long term. Final note, a lot to get to. On the bridge, it's largely addressed in our brief. The only point, unless there are questions I'd like to make, is that it is an issue that's relevant, and we've discussed this in our brief. 3693, 170, sub 2 and 3 talk about the impact of annexations on the finances of neighboring jurisdictions, and that's the context in which we think it's relevant. In conclusion, for these reasons, and those discussed in the county's briefing, we respectfully request that the board deny Tukwila's proposal. Denying Tukwila's proposal does not dictate any particular outcome. Rather, it would allow for an opportunity for all of the affected jurisdictions, districts, community groups, stakeholders to come together and achieve a coordinated governance solution for all of North Highline. And that's something that Mr. Jarrett will now speak to in a little further.
Thank you. My name is Fred Jarrett, and I am the King County Deputy Executive now. Our offices are located at 401 Fifth Avenue in Seattle, but in a prior life I had the opportunity to spend several years sitting on your side of the table, so I have some understanding of the dilemma that you face in having to deal with some of these issues, some Hobbesian choices, I think. The role that I wanted to play tonight was to talk a little bit about the complexity of the boundaries and the irregularities and difficulties that are already here, some of which have been here for years. For example, when you land at King County Airport, which we operate, you land in Tukwila, fly through Seattle, and then end up in Tukwila again. It's a strange set of boundaries. Property lines or property parcels are frequently cut in half by cities, one half being in one city, another in the other. We think as a regional government that King County has the experience and is well suited to bring folks together to talk about these issues and work with the municipal government, special purpose districts, community groups, constituents, etc. And we'd like to have the opportunity to do that in this case. We support annexation. Obviously, that is the policy of King County. But we don't think that this proposal is the solution that meets the criteria, the objectives of the RCW, nor the policies under the Growth Management Act, our countywide growth management policies, or our comprehensive plan. We'd like to have the opportunity to bring all of the parties together and spend some time thinking about how do we logically serve these communities with the municipal services that they deserve. We think that there is a governance solution for Area Q, for the sliver, and Area Y, which can solve more than just the immediate problems of those areas. Your denial of this proposal would simply allow us to have the opportunity to do that. Your approval would set in stone a number of irregularities that would be there for years. Again, I want to say thank you for the time and thought that you put into this endeavor. As I said, I have some, I should say, sympathy for the decisions that you get to make, and I do appreciate the time and the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Does the board have any questions?
Yes, I would like someone from King County to restate each of these annexation areas, the Y, the Q, and the sliver, for us, whose area they're in, because I know some are joint. And then, if you can, answer if it's more logical that there's a different outcome, and let's just say, for example, it were, the desired outcome would be for all these three areas to be in Seattle's PAA. What are the steps to get the PAAs lined up in order to get to such a point? Or it could even say they're all Tukwila.
So let me
There's this
take a
mixture
crack.
here.
Let me take a crack at that. I don't think we have a strong opinion on that subject. What we have a strong opinion about is that there needs to be some thoughtful planning, given where we are today as opposed to where we were when area Y, Q, and Z were pulled together. We think that there are opportunities beyond just those areas to rationalize the boundaries, to solve some problems that property owners have, that businesses have, and that municipalities have, in a way that provides the best municipal services to all of the residents of the area. And we would like to have that opportunity to go have those discussions with, as I said, the city of Seattle, with Tukwila, with the community, with leadership groups in the business community in that area.
Well, restating the question though, if everyone comes together and there's some solution, and one of the PAAs needs to be converted to another agency, the jurisdiction's PAA, what is that process?
Well, I think if you look at the record that we have over the last few years, bringing people together to talk about how do we allocate transit service, for example. When we started the Regional Transit Task Force, the notion was that there was no way that you could get a regional discussion or decision about a performance-based method of allocating transit service. We had this 20-40-40 policy that had been in place for about 10 years. We were able to bring together the groups that were involved in that were stakeholders in that, and work through the issues in detail. And rather than having a very short meeting tonight to talk about some very detailed issues at a very high level, to get down to the details of what actually did make sense and how did you change that policy. So we came up with something that was an entirely different in conceptual, in its conceptual framework than what we had started with. And I think the same thing is true here. This is a problem-solving process that we want to go through. It's the sort of thing that we're trying to bring into any number of places within the county, both internally and in our external affairs, where we sit down and we say, here's the problem. How do we find alternatives? How do we figure out what the best alternative is? And how do we find something that we all can live with? And I think we have confidence that that is a process that works. It doesn't work as quickly as one might like. It took us almost a year to get the transit policies in place. But we think it pays off in the long run, and that's what we'd like to have the opportunity to do.
Other questions?
Yeah, I agree, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm going to pin you down on this one.
Sure.
It seems as though your answer to the earlier question is to simply sit down and have meetings. And I guess what I'm confused about is, do we need to have city council say we take that out of our PAA, it's now up for grabs? Do there have to be any specific legal steps taken to have those meetings that you're speaking of?
I'll have to turn to our attorney.
Let's do it. Thank you.
My answer is no.
Thank you.
The
Okay.
attorney probably has the right
Okay,
answer.
that's what we need the process.
Again, for the record, Jennifer Stacy with the prosecutor's office. So as we saw with Area Y, when the voters did not adopt the annexation, the city of Buren, the city council voted to remove Area Y from its PAA. So if someone were going to pull out, they would need to take formal legislative action. And then for a body to designate an area as its PAA, they would need to do so in their comprehensive plan. They would need to go through the Growth Management Planning Council. And so those would be the kinds of planning steps that would be involved. And as Mr. Jarrett discussed, those things take time, but there's certainly a process for that. And once everyone can come together, that those wheels can start moving.
The key element is to sit down and start talking through on a problem-solving basis with all of the parties and say, what's an outcome that we want to run through that process? The process is mechanical. The process of sitting down and having those discussions is creative.
Yes, Mr. McCready.
I don't think the question that Claudia asked about the specific PAAs was ever answered.
Thank you.
If I may, Karen Freeman from the Executive's Office, 401 Fifth Avenue. So just to clarify, who has claimed the PAAs presently? Thank you, Major Grant. Thank you, Reggie. North Highline Area Y is presently claimed by the cities of Seattle and Burien. As Ms. Stacy mentioned, Burien took one step towards removing it from their PAA, but there's more to that process than that step. So currently, this is designated by Seattle and Burien. The triangle, or Area Q, is currently designated by the cities of Seattle and Tukwila, and the sliver has been is going through the process of Seattle claiming it as their PAA, and that should be ratified
Right,
in
the council has
March.
taken action, it's just awaiting ratification.
It's awaiting an appeal period. So that's the status of the PAAs currently. So those cities can come before the board and make application for annexation, and then and that's what we've relied on. Thank you, gentlemen. We've relied on a collaborative process through the Growth Management Planning Council where cities make designations and then they bring proposals forward to the BRB, and this is where we have the discussion about the appropriateness of the boundaries and service areas and that kind of thing.
Board members have further questions?
I have one more.
Yes.
We have Exhibit BBB is given to us this evening. Jim Hilmar, did that further analysis. I'm not sure if his number is high per capita or average or low. Can you, or maybe that's a sheriff question?
The major might be able to answer that. I don't know on a per capita basis.
Okay.
I wanted to provide it just to a little context in terms of, looking at more than just kind of a 9-month time frame, looking at a larger time frame, what the numbers really look like, and so you all could have a sense of, what number of calls are we dealing with.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I am Major Jim Grattan with the King County Sheriff's Office. Most of my 34 years with the Sheriff's Office has been in service to the South King County area, so I am very familiar with that until most recently, in the middle of last year, I actually had served for 5 years as the precinct commander for this area, which of course included the South Park area. To answer your question, I apologize because I don't know which specific exhibit you're talking to. What I can speak to, I think broadly, is that the numbers of calls to both the industrial area and to the sliver area are in proportion to the rest of the North Highline area and the rest of the calls to our Burien and CTAC contract partnerships, relatively low. Those are low call counts. And our response times, we count queue time in our response times. In other words, from the time the phone call receiver at the communication center receives the call and pushes the send button to the dispatcher, and then the dispatcher sends the cars and the cars arrive. That is an inclusive time. So you may have had that as an exhibit. So the 8 or 9 minutes that you see for some, the 6 or 7 minutes for others, is an inclusive piece of time. It's not just travel time. Just wanted to make sure there was clarification on that point.
Other questions?
Just on the calls, since you're up here, I'm actually kind of surprised that there was roughly 374 calls into the triangle when it's really a daytime industrial use type area.
For a 5-year period.
Yeah, 5
That's
years.
for a 5-year.
5
Yeah,
years,
it's 5 years.
5 years.
What's the, okay, but that's,
It's not clear, it's not crystal clear. Other questions?
The nature of the calls there, oftentimes thefts, burglaries. We just recently handled a significant industrial accident down there.
I'm sorry, I see the way it's written, it says 5-year period, parentheses, again, about 21, is that's the whole district?
7%
So 17% of the 2109 is the district calls? It's not real clear.
Let me offer some clarification. So for the sliver, in a 5-year period, we had approximately 144 details. In the triangle, in a 5-year period, we had approximately 374
No.
details.
Yeah, I think that's clear, it's just the way it's written, it's a little,
Other questions? Yes,
I guess I want to go back to the Area Y and the legal process. I just want to clarify in my own head. So Burion's intention is to remove, remove it from the Area Y from their PAA, and they've already gone through the process of, is that what you're saying? or-
Again, Karen Freeman, Executive Office. I wouldn't want to speak for Burien, but what I can speak to facts. And the one part of the Burien City Council convened and took a vote to remove it from their PAA. The full council was not there.
Okay.
There is some discussion at the city of Burien about whether or not they actually want to do that. There are more steps to it than just that one step, and so they are
Since
having a
comprehensive
conversation.
plans are involved, I think that this is all a unique situation, so.
They would have to
so-
amend their comprehensive.
Right, so I think that would be, so they've taken the step of taking the vote to decide to remove it, but I think it would require.
And then I think an undesignation process at GMPC.
That's correct.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
there
so
are
they would,
several
so
steps.
amending their comprehensive plan, then back through GMPC. So either way, there would be comprehensive plan amendments and growth management plan involved.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question if no one else does. Okay, thank you.
All authorized,
City of Tukwila supplemental brief, page 4. I'm just going to read it to you and ask you if you agree with the characterization here. It says, Tukwila's annexation of Area Q does not create abnormal boundaries. That's the heading. No irregular boundaries are being created by the proposed annexation. The sliver is a pre-existing anomaly, not one created by this annexation. The sliver has existed for over 100 years. Seattle and King County have taken no steps in the last century to address this issue. Moreover, when King County approved Seattle's PAA, it failed to require that the sliver be added to its PAA. Could you address that characterization?
So I'll take a first crack and then if Karen, we would disagree with that assertion. We think that, as I addressed a little bit earlier, that there are, by these types of piecemeal annexations, and specifically here where the triangle is, bounded by the Duwamish, and then the city of Seattle, and basically any other jurisdiction aside from Tukwila except for 300 feet. We think that that kind of outreach, especially we're separated by a natural physical boundary, one of the factors for the board to consider, creates an abnormally irregular boundary by just taking that one piece. Not to mention kind of the inconsistency with the county's comprehensive plan about not just taking pieces that are financially advantageous while ignoring lesser revenue areas. That's specifically in U205 as well. On the King County Seattle point, if I captured that correctly, that the county and Seattle have been in discussions about the sliver. The sliver is now almost officially in Seattle's PAA, so that may move forward. And as discussed in our brief, the county and the city of Seattle had been negotiating on an ILA for the triangle and for the sliver just prior to Tukwila filing its application with the board. So as stated in our brief, those are discussions that had already been started. Does that answer?
Yes, it does. I'm not sure if this is for the city of Seattle or for King County. This is also from the city of Tuckwillah's supplemental brief on page 10. And it has to do with the cost of the bridge maintenance, so it may be for both of you, I'm not sure. If you feel that you can't answer it, I'll wait until the city of Seattle comes up. Now that Burion's annexation of Area Y has failed, Seattle is free to pursue annexation of Area Y, which more than covers the cost of bridge maintenance. I was wondering if you agree with that characterization.
We would disagree with that characterization, and Seattle, I think, is maybe best positioned to discuss this. They've run the numbers, and those numbers, both a high and a low estimate, were included in their initial brief. I have those with me this evening. If you'd like to pull those out, that may be something that Seattle can address, that the numbers don't pencil out as Tukwila states there.
Oops.
I think one other question.
Yes, Mr. Cook.
Mr. Jarrett, I appreciate what you said about the sitting down, and as you sat on this side, you know that sometimes that is fruitful thinking, particularly when all the low-lying fruit has been picked essentially, and now we have areas that we hear all the time on the board essentially don't pay for themselves.
Don't they do? By definition.
Well, I'm just saying what we hear.
I mean, our budget is constrained, and the amount of money that we get in the general fund is what has to pay for the court system and all of the local services that are in that court.
No, but we're hearing it from areas, jurisdictions that are annexing and saying, we're gonna take it, doesn't pay. I'm just saying what we're hearing. Area Q is a little unique, and that is it's a profit center, so to speak. And really my question is, with the city's budget constraints as they are, and City of Seattle and dealing with the Area Y, contentious about when that was up, of who's gonna pay, how's it gonna pay, how are we gonna do it without the state matching or the sales tax revenue that was helping it. How realistic is it that this actually would happen? And
I think it's very realistic. There isn't any choice. You know, as I was just pointing out, we have in unincorporated King County nowhere near the tax resources that an incorporated city does. And so the amount of money that we have in general fund revenue out of these areas is not sufficient to be able to provide a level of service that is acceptable to the region, not just the community, but the region. To give you an example, I think the number was that when the area, the JFK area annexed Kirkland, the police protection in Kirkland went up 5 times. West Hill, the plan was to add 4 times the police protection. And those are standard levels of services for those incorporated areas. People who live in unincorporated urban King County are paying for those services. They're paying for those services through their sales tax and other taxes that they pay. They just aren't being collected in a way that can be used to fund the services. So we have to solve that problem. We will be in front of the legislature this session talking about how do we create a situation where that is easier to solve. We have specific proposals around changes to the sales tax credits, to providing the county with the resources, the taxing resources to be able to generate the income out of those areas that you could if it was a municipal area, and other strategies to be able to make these annexations take place. The policy of King County is we're out of the urban services business. That is not what we do. It's not what we do well. We want to be a regional service provider. We do, I think, a very good job of regional services. We want to be a rural service provider at the last resort. We think we do that well. We just moved our land use facility out of, our land use office out of Renton, put it out in Snoqualmie, because that's where our customer base is, and that's where we expect the growth and permitting to be. So this problem has to be solved. It's just a question of when. We would like to be able to use this as an opportunity to be able to sit down with all of the parties and try to figure out a way that we can make this happen in a way that creates boundaries that are appropriate given the services that, municipal services that need to be provided in the most efficient and effective way possible for the citizens who live in those areas.
Any other questions? Does it have to be a question? What we heard at the last hearing, I have to say this for the people in this room that might be disappointed about the outcome. What I heard in the last hearing, portion of the hearing, was from the county and Seattle is, we don't want it, but we don't want you to have it either.
Well, I think that's not correct.
Okay.
I mean, what we want as a matter of policy is we want unincorporated areas to be inside of incorporated cities. That has been the county's policy since I was on the Growth Management Policy Board in the early 90s, since I was on the Boundary Review Board. I made that argument a number of times on the Boundary Review Board. The issue here is, how do you establish boundaries that are appropriate for the next century? And as I said in my remarks earlier, if you look at the boundaries around this area, I could argue that this isn't the worst. The worst is some of the other boundaries between Seattle and Tukwila, et cetera. We would like to be, we think there are opportunities, and we would like to have the opportunity to have discussions about how do we rationalize that? How do we set something up that makes for a long-term solution for providing municipal services, and in the process eliminates the unincorporated areas and puts them into cities? Because as I said, it's not that we don't want them, it's that state policy, county policy, regional policy is that they should be inside of incorporated cities, because incorporated cities have the tax base, the municipal legal tools, and the culture as governments to be able to provide these level of services and these kinds of services that counties just don't have.
So that answer tells me that truly this is going to move forward and not become stagnant and sit like it has sat in the past.
I would point to the South Park Bridge. I would point to the Regional Transit Task Force. I would point to the strategic plan that we put together for roads. It is the policy of Dow's administration that we find problems, that we try to solve those problems in a collaborative way as efficiently, effectively, and as fast as we possibly can, and then we implement solutions. So, no, we won't let this, we're disappointed that it's gone on this long.
I trust you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and again, I appreciate all of the work you have to do. I know others.
Next to the podium, please, is the City of Seattle.
For the record, I'm Kenny Pittman with the City of Seattle, 604th Avenue, and I really appreciate the opportunity to address the board on this issue. One of the things, given the lateness of the time, and I know the board has gotten reams and reams of paper, my goal is basically to just kind of briefly go over and pretty much respond to some of the questions that the chair has brought up. And basically to say that we support what King County has said, and we respectfully request that you disapprove Tuckwill's proposed annexation of North Highline Area Q. I know that there was a question that was raised in Tuckwilla's supplemental brief concerning if now that since Murion no longer has annexation area Y, that if Seattle annexed the area, there would be adequate resources to go ahead and fund the operations of the South Park Bridge. And that is not true, one of the things that we have provided is that when we did an analysis of area Y that included area Q, because the sliver was not in our PAA, which will not be in until March of this year. And while we did look at receiving anywhere between $11.9 and $17 million in revenues, the city of Seattle has expenses. Unlike the Burke analysis that looked at the city of Burien, we have a fire department that is not a separate taxing district. We have a library that we fund that is not a separate taxing district. The city of Seattle provides a high level of human services to its residents, and we took that into consideration when we looked at Area Y, the residents that lived there realizing that they needed a high level of services also, and not to basically say, well, we'll just cut it back and there'll be lesser served residents that are within the rest of the city of Seattle. So we disagree with their assumption and the assumption by the people from Burke who mentioned that, well, given the cost of efficiencies, it should be a lot cheaper. We are a city of 600,000 people. We have a lot of residents. Our residents demand a level of services. They tax themselves to provide those services through families and ed levy. And those residents that any area that we would annex would also receive those same services. That is our policy, and we would never change that. Then it's also been brought up the questions about the various potential annexation area. And it also makes it sound like in Area Q that we are a latecomer to the game. The city of Seattle has had Area Q as its potential annexation area since 1995, and then expanded to include all of Y, and actually all of the area that is now the northern part of Burien. And with the discussions with the city of Burien and with King County, we sat down and decided and worked out an agreement between all parties that Burien would take the southern part of it, and if that annexation was not successful, then Seattle would look at doing the whole area. Our whole approach always is that all of the areas need to go at one time because of fire service protections that we could provide there, and assuming Fire District 11 at that time. And as stated, as March of this year, the sliver will become Seattle's potential annexation area. Also, I have with me today is Assistant Chief Hepburn, who's here as part of this declaration to be able to respond to any questions that you may have on fire service issues. But once again, we support the points raised by King County and respectfully request that you disapprove this annexation. I'm here for any questions.
Any questions from the board? If none, I have one. This is from your City of Seattle supplemental brief, page 6. I'm just going to read the paragraph. I'm sorry to take so long, but I don't know how else to condense it. It says, Tukwila errs in suggesting that the board may not consider the fire service that Seattle could provide to Area Q. This was a question that came up in the last, our last hearing. Washington courts have recognized that the inquiry under Objective 3 encompasses consideration of whether any other entity other than the city proposing the annexation under review has the current or future capacity to provide services to the area. And I remember Ms. Casilius asking your attorney, Mr. Weber, about this. And then it's quoted, this case, Lear versus Whatcom County Boundary Review Board. Assuming I understand from what this paragraph implicates that the Boundary Review Board can look outside of the jurisdiction that is asking for annexation. We can look at what's going to happen in the surrounding areas under other jurisdictions' levels of service. Is that what this paragraph is implicating?
You know, I want to apologize. Mr. Weber is not here, and I have not had a chance to talk to him about what the meant in that paragraph, so I would not feel comfortable responding, trying to assume what he...
Ms. Casilius, did you have anything you might want to add to that?
No, I did notice that your interpretation is how I interpret it. And I believe that Mr. Weber did, at the time I asked the question, there wasn't a clear source of law that enabled you to look to the provision of services that Seattle could provide, and this is a new legal citation that has been provided in the supplemental brief.
Any other questions from the board?
Thank you.
Brian Snurr from the North Highline Fire District.
Thank you, honorable board members. I'm Brian Snurr, 612 South 227th Street, Des Moines, Washington, General Legal Counsel for North Highline Fire District. North Highline Fire District's position is unchanged from the last time we appeared before you. The effect of the failure of annexation wide does not change our basic opposition to any further piecemeal annexation of the remainder of the fire district. The only way, consistent with what the county was arguing, the only way to deal with Area Y, Area Q, and the sliver is to have them dealt with at the same time. Otherwise, we'll have a fire district that's just further fractured, getting smaller. Fire districts, if you look around the state, are consolidating and getting larger because they need to be able to afford to provide level of services. And I'll talk a bit about the financial impacts of Area Q annexation is allowed to proceed. Make a couple comments on the negotiations. The fire district has met, as City of Tukwila noted, a number of times trying to negotiate an agreement. I don't know that it serves anybody's interest up here to talk about what went back and forth in the negotiation, but there were some questions. So just to summarize, North Highline was asking for a 10-year agreement where they would continue to serve the area. My understanding from what Tukwila has submitted is they were offering a 5-year agreement. That gap, for whatever reason, was not bridged. The other important part of what North Highline was asking for an agreement was service to the sliver, so that if at the end of that 10-year period Tukwila takes over service, they would also then be able to serve the sliver. They would be the closest provider at that time. It would avoid some of the boundary discrepancies. I was not directly involved in the negotiations. It was handled by a commissioner. But my understanding is that Tukwila didn't want to do that, and that's a difficult issue for the fire district because the sliver remains a big issue. I noted on page 14 of Tukwila's brief, they indicate that their agreement did address the sliver. Perhaps that was a typo, but the agreement they submitted did not address the sliver. The reasons, the specific questions of Andrew Newberg are going to have follow-up after the failure of annexation. Why? Really, North Highline's reasons for objecting to this annexation haven't changed. It's not just about what happens in Area Q from North Highline's perspective. We've made the point, we haven't argued that Tukwila would be an adequate service provider of fire service in Area Q. We think we're better, but we think they do a fine job. Seattle would do a fine job. It's not the service in Area Q that is the problem. And it gets to a question, I think you just asked the City of Seattle about that quote in their brief. The Boundary Review Board does have the authority, and I think the responsibility to look outside of the actual annexation area to look at what Seattle could do in addition to Tukwila, and that's all contained in your statutory factors, 3693, 170, 2, and 3, where it provides the Boundary Review Board shall consider probable future needs for services and controls, probable effect of a proposal or alternative on cost and adequacy of services and controls in area and adjacent area. It's the adjacent areas that are going to be a problem for North Highline Fire District. If the annexation goes forward, Tukwila has emphasized it's only 7.1% of North Highline. And that, I think their briefing says that just is a little impact or an insignificant impact. We submitted today for the board's review the declaration of Mike Mars showing what that little insignificant impact actually is. It's approximately $150 tax revenue reduction and around a $245,000, $250,000 asset transfer. Not huge numbers, but for a fire district the size of North Highline, what that means is they'll have to lay off a firefighter. I wish Chief Mars was here to fully explain this, but they lay off a firefighter, they have minimum staffing of 3 on their fire engines. If they lay off one firefighter, they can no longer meet minimum staffing on all of their fire engines. So the result of that potential result of that is that they have to take one fire engine out of service for about a third of the time that they're providing 24-hour services. So the point of those numbers is they may not be huge, but there is a significant impact. It's going to have an impact on the service, maybe not in Area Q, because Tukwila could be serving them, but it will have an impact on the sliver. It will have an impact on Area Y. The loss of the assets would also have an impact. It would deplete a large portion of the district's reserves, making it difficult to purchase new equipment to maintain facilities. Fire districts are expensive. Every dollar counts. The key in understanding that is when you reduce the revenues by 7.1% and you take the area out of North Island, that's a relatively small area that they provide service to. They can't just drop their service level by that percent to save that amount of money, because the fire district has to be staffed to respond 24 hours a day with their minimum staffing, so they don't have the luxury of having a reduction in service demand when they have the reduction in revenue that the statutes would trigger. In terms of the specific objectives, I think I have discussed those, but the problem for North Highline, once again, even though Area Y will continue to exist, the sliver will become an abnormally irregular boundary. If you look at just the North Highline Fire District, certainly this annexation creates an abnormally irregular boundary, because from North Highline's perspective, you're splitting it in two pieces. It's an illogical service area. North Highline, to respond into the sliver, if this annexation were approved, would be driving not just through Seattle, but now through Tukwila and Seattle. One of the objectives of the boards is to reduce confusion amongst the population. So if you're in the sliver and you've got North Highline running through two cities, those are the exact types of things we believe the Boundary Review Board is designed to avoid. So our proposal, our request, respectful request, is that you deny the annexation. I think the county did an eloquent job of suggesting that there can be agreements in place. There's an agreement in place that long-term addresses the dissolution of North Highline as these three areas go away. That's what North Highline wants to see. We don't have that agreement now. We tried to negotiate one to kind of mitigate the impacts, recognizing that we have to do something. We don't have that agreement. Because we don't have that agreement, we believe the annexation should be denied. I'll reiterate, it is also our belief that this board can impose a condition on Tukwila with specific terms under your statutory authority that's outlined in our initial brief. I've brought it up a number of times to this board, but we do believe that you can specifically condition the annexation on a 10-year term or continued service to the sliver. We'd rather negotiate one, but we're at the point where you're going to make a decision, so if you don't deny it, we would ask that you condition it on specific terms.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Snert, I have one. If one of the sticking points is that the city of Tukwila wants to give you a 5-year time frame in which to, phase out, work things out, and you want a 10-year time frame, how does a 10-year time frame square with your statement just a minute ago that you understand that you'll be going out of business? This sounds to me like it's prolonging your longevity.
Specifically, just to clarify, what we wanted was a 10-year agreement with then a 5-year ramp down that allows services to transfer, but North Highland did retain enough finances to continue serving the Area Y and the sliver. As long as Area Y and the sliver exist, we have to serve them, absent an agreement from another provider. So if we have 10 years of revenues, because we're still serving Area Q, there's accomplishes two things. One, it gives us time to plan for a reduction in revenues in 10 years. Two, it gives time for the city of Seattle, presumably, or Burien, to come back in and annex the other areas. It gives us time. 5 years simply takes all the negatives that we're talking about right now and pushes them down 5 years down the road. We don't believe, A, that's enough time to deal with the financial consequences of losing that revenue. And importantly, I just want to emphasize this again, it still leaves the sliver issue for North Highline out there, and that's a incredibly important part of an agreement for us.
Yes, Mr. Toy.
There was a point made earlier by Tukwila that conditioning on approval of annexation of Area Q on further discussions for an interlocal agreement with North Highland Fire District is one way that the solution could be sought, similar to the Area Y condition that was attached by the BRA. Do you see them as similar in terms of complexity, or similar in terms of simplicity, or what's the I guess what's the parity in terms of that potential solution in these two situations?
I think they're completely different situations because the Area Y annexation would take 93% of North Highland Fire District. By statute, that triggers a transfer of all assets to Berrien. Berrien's then required to provide service. North Highland could hold an election requiring Berrien to provide service to the areas outside of the city of Berrien. So we asked for more stringent conditions on the Area Y annexation, but what the board issued and having the ability to negotiate an agreement was, I guess, more feasible there because the consequences of that annexation essentially made North Highland go away because Berrien would have the responsibility. That doesn't occur when there's only 7% annexation. There's no statutory trigger that would require Tukwila to continue serving the entire area. So a more specific condition with specific terms is what we believe would be necessary in this situation.
Yes, Mr. Cooper.
The bargaining that's been going on, negotiations, it sounds like really it's just a 5-year dilemma here, because what I'm hearing is you want 10, they're out for 5. I'm not hearing any, the asset transfer apparently is off the table. That's not going to happen if the agreement was
Correct.
signed.
My understanding is both sides, that Tukwila is willing to forego the asset transfer. So in a peer negotiation, if we started at 15, they started at 5, we should end up at 10. But we didn't. Maybe it was good to keep the attorney.
You don't watch the news much, do you? I don't think that happens anymore.
My understanding is we expected to have an agreement on, I think it was Monday or Tuesday that they last met. I'm not sure. Tukwila indicated they didn't want the 10-year agreement at that time. They can presumably speak to that if that's when it ended.
Well, I guess my question is, it seems like a pretty good deal, I'll just say, because we know that at one point in time in the future, Area Y will go somewhere, and when it goes, the district goes. We also know the problematic nature of it. This has been on the table for long years and everything. But the dilemma we have now is it's not in place. And I guess I would have been a little more encouraged tonight if there had been something in place. But I mean, are you sensing? I mean, you weren't there. I get that. But
the instruction from my client was if we don't have an agreement, we have no alternative than to oppose. My advice to my client is we have to oppose if we don't have an agreement in place, because if the Banner Review Board approves it, Tukwila may, out of a sense of doing what's right, continue to negotiate some type of agreement, but we have no protection in that situation. They could simply exercise their statutory rights and move forward. So we were hoping to have an agreement. I'll emphasize once again that the agreement is taking the bitter pill solution for North Highland. What we want is a consolidated resolution of all these boundary issues that deals with everything and not just dealing with Area Q for 5 years or 10 years. We wanted something that would accomplish.
I think I'd be fair in saying, speaking to the board would like that too, but we don't have that. So, yeah. Okay.
And from our perspective, the best way for the board to get that would be to deny consent.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Stern.
Thank you.
The final testimony will come in the form of a rebuttal from the city of Tukwila at this point, please.
Yes, sir. Try to be briefer than that. Turning first to King County's presentation, and as I think, I know we have agreement on the full board here that Fred Jarrett is a tough act to follow. The county has done a good job solving a lot of problems. The county's failed miserably at solving this problem. This issue goes back to 1995. Tukwila adopted its PAA for Area Q in 1995. In 1996, Seattle adopted an overlapping PAA for Area Q. Starting in the late 90s, there are a series of agreements and resolutions and this and that among Seattle, King County, and Tukwila to solve the North Highline problem. There has been no solution. Earlier this year, and these are new exhibits that we admitted tonight, there are letters between Seattle and Tukwila triggering the LU-32 the LU-32 plan policy, CPP, that requires the discussion, the negotiation, and mediation, formal mediation with an external mediator on this PA overlap issue. No resolution occurred. Then Tukwila received the request from the property owners in Area Q to annex. After 17 years as Tukwila's PAA, Tukwila responded to the request. No money grab, no attempt to slide in under the wire and take something for nothing. 17 years of PAA, 15 years of meeting with Seattle and King County, no resolution. So we're going forward. The exhibits are the letters that we've handed up to the clerk. The sliver has in fact been an unincorporated island for 105 years. Exhibit 10 to the city's opening brief, its November brief, is Seattle's own documentation, talking about South Park. South Park citizens voted 131 to 59 for annexation to Seattle on March 23rd, 1907. No action's been taken for 105 years. Tukwila's brief, the supplemental brief also indicates a question that one of the board members asked, that Seattle can now annex area-wide and it would cover the bridge costs. Well, we've read and acknowledged that Seattle put some financial analysis into the record. We'd urge the board to look at the Hodgins declaration from Burke and Associates. That declaration makes clear that Burien would have realized a net revenue of almost $2 million from area-wide. While Mr. Pittman's correct, Seattle has its own library, has its own fire department that cannot levy its own taxes. The trade-off there is Seattle can levy a maximum of $3.60 per 1,000 of assessed value. Burien, because it's got a district for fire and library district, can only levy $1.60. So it's apples and apples. There's $2 million worth of money, worth of net revenue in area-wide that Seattle could realize as well. Additionally, Seattle and King County seem to be estimating, or appear to be estimating in this record, nearly $800,000 a year in annual maintenance and operations costs for the bridge. The draft EIS, which is attached as Exhibit 12 to Tukwila's opening brief, the October brief, shows $11 million of M&O over 75 years. So that's about a little under $150,000 a year for M&O, not $800,000 a year. You can keep in mind that Tukwila is paying $832,000 a year, that's Park Director Rick Still's declaration, for maintenance and operation of the equally regional facilities of Fort Dent Park and Foster Pool. And finally, just turning to Mr. Snur's comments, just refer you again to Exhibit 14 to Tukwila's brief. It is the draft agreement. It does waive the asset transfer. It also obligates Tukwila to pay to the district for 5 years the full amount of property tax and leasehold excise tax revenue the district would have otherwise received in Area Q. It is a screaming deal for Fire District 11. Area Q has been in Tukwillah's annexation area since 1995. It was far too late for any other party to now collaterally attack that. Tukwillah is only responding to requests made to it by the property owners to annex that area, and it is ready to do so. The 2003 interlocal agreement is an important document that reflects an agreement between King County and Tukwillah. Not leverage, not extortion, a knowing agreement by Ron Sims and the County Council and Mayor Mullet and the City Council to swap regional liabilities. In that agreement, in addition to swapping those regional liabilities, Tukwillah paid $3 million for the design of the bridge. Tukwillah paid that money, the bridge is designed, it's under construction. The county's not offering to return that $3 million to Tukwillah. Tukwillah deserves the benefit of the bargain it struck. Finally, as I said before, Area Q is the entirety of Tukwillah's PAA. It is clear from the record and from the testimony that but for the bridge issue, there'd be no opposition to this annexation. It is only Seattle and King County working in concert to try to find more money from Tukwillah and the residents, property owners of Area Q to fund a regional obligation. This annexation shall be approved.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. King. That concludes testimony, so this is the time to decide to close the... Yes, I would hear a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? All those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Public hearing is now closed, and I would like to suggest that we take a 5-minute recess and be back here at 10 minutes.